You don't get to throw a party in someone else's house without knocking first, I muttered under my breath as the scent of fresh paint and waxed hardwood hit me before I even turned the doorknob. The faint hum of what I guessed was a sound system vibrated through the walls, and my stomach tightened like a coiled spring. I'd just returned from a weekend trip to find my living room transformed into a makeshift event hall, balloons dangling from the ceiling and folding chairs arranged in neat rows where my vintage tool bench usually sat. Every inch of the space carried the faint perfume of artificial flowers, mingling with the residual metallic tang from my workshop that still clung to the air like a stubborn memory. My name is Jackson Cole, 40 years old, a civil engineer who can build bridges but also rewires my own house to perfection, and until this moment, I thought buying this suburban haven in Willowbrook Estates would finally mean peace, a space to rebuild after a messy divorce and reconnect with the hands-on projects I loved. The front door swung wider, and there she was, Margaret Harlow, the HOA president with her sharp white blouse tucked neatly, a clipboard clutched to her chest, her expression the perfect blend of sugary sweet and simmering authority. She smiled at the gathered neighbors, the ones I didn't even know, and in a voice that seemed practiced for maximum charm, she declared, "Welcome, everyone, to our community gathering." Jackson was kind enough to offer his home. Every word landed like gravel under a running car, my teeth gritted as I stepped fully inside, boots crunching softly against the hardwood. The sunlight through the blinds caught on the edges of carefully positioned centerpieces, casting elongated shadows across my floor like warning signs I hadn't anticipated. I could hear the faint click of heels pacing across the foyer, the occasional whisper of neighbors exchanging polite curiosities, and above it all, the bass from the stereo thrumming in uneven pulses that seemed to sync with my heartbeat. My hands itched to reach for the camera perched silently in the corner, recording every angle, every illegal step, every casual trespass. But before I moved, I took in the scene fully, my custom shelving units lined with tools and DIY projects, now hidden behind rented tablecloths, the small library where I kept engineering manuals and weekend plans, now doubling as a gift display, even my coffee station, meticulously arranged, now turned into a makeshift refreshment table. The smell of roasted coffee beans mixed strangely with the cheap floral air, a contrast that made my stomach turn. Every detail mattered because every detail would matter later when I planned my counterstrike. Maggie's voice floated again, instructing someone to adjust a banner above the fireplace, a banner claiming the house as a venue for the community celebration, as if mere words could overwrite my ownership, my history, the years of sweat and planning poured into this place. I felt the cool metal of my keychain in my pocket, the familiar weight grounding me as the realization hit, every single movement, every small violation, every step taken by this self-appointed authority was a thread I could pull. The air felt electric, thick with the scent of wax and cheap perfume, tinged with the faint ozone-like smell of a heater running too hot in the corner. I breathed it in and held it, letting the tension build, letting the absurdity of it all sharpen my focus. No shouting, no confrontation yet, just observation, measurement, the quiet pulse of potential energy waiting to transform. This wasn't just a house, it was a statement, a stake in my life, and as the bass thumped through the room, I knew exactly where each piece of evidence was, how each guest's movement could be documented, and how every overstep by Maggie would set the stage for the response she'd never see coming. And right there, amid the hum of electronics, the smell of flowers, and the soft scrape of chair legs, I smiled just enough for no one to notice, because the first seeds of legal demolition were already taking root in my mind. My life had always revolved around structure and precision, the kind of order that comes from building things with my own hands and calculating every measurement down to the nearest inch. Jackson Cole was the name that greeted. Neighbors on the mailbox, the man who spent weekends rewiring outlets, recalibrating workshop machinery, and tinkering with solar panels he had installed himself. Every corner of the house reflected my touch, from the polished oak floors that creaked only when they decided to the custom shelving that held my tools in perfect alignment, each hammer, wrench, and measuring tape sitting like soldiers ready for inspection. After my divorce, this home became my sanctuary, a place where I could immerse myself in projects, where I could teach my teenage daughter the satisfaction of watching a blueprint come to life and the patience required to wire a room without shortcuts. The garage, an extension of my mind, smelled of warm sawdust and motor oil, a combination that always grounded me even when the world outside felt chaotic. I remembered every evening spent there last summer, sweat dripping onto the concrete, my fingers blackened from wires, testing circuits until the lights danced perfectly to my specifications. Outside, the yard reflected the same dedication, grass mowed in precise rows, flowers planted in geometric patterns that obeyed my own sense of harmony rather than any HOA guidebook. The scent of lavender and freshly turned soil reminded me of Sunday mornings when I would stand with a trowel in hand, planting the next generation of growth, literal evidence of the patience and care I had cultivated over years. Every plant, every pathway, every polished door handle spoke of time invested, of intention behind action. And then there was the neighborhood itself, Willowbrook Estates, a collection of homes that seemed serene from afar but were tightly governed by rules that often felt arbitrary, enforced by an organization that prided itself on order yet frequently overstepped personal boundaries. My interactions with Margaret Harlow were always tinged with that tension. She carried herself with the air of absolute authority, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp behind oversized glasses, but never seemed aware of the human element beneath the neat lawns and painted fences. That weekend, as I stepped back from the living room, observing the setup she had orchestrated, I felt that familiar pulse of resolve. Each decision I had made in the house, each project, each corner meticulously arranged, formed a foundation for what was coming next. I recalled the hundreds of hours spent scanning local ordinances, reviewing property rights, and cross-referencing HOA bylaws against municipal code, every document catalogued in binders lined along my office wall, a library of defense built out of foresight. The hum of the stereo and the laughter drifting from the makeshift gathering in the living room could not mask the methodical plan that had already taken shape in my mind. I noticed the way the decorations had been hung over my artwork, the subtle misalignment of chairs blocking pathways I had meticulously cleared, the positioning of refreshments near outlets I had rewired for optimal voltage flow, each detail a hint at the extent of intrusion, a roadmap for corrective action. My daughter's soccer trophies, usually dusted weekly, now surrounded by party favors, became markers for placement and attention, reminders that the life I had built was worth defending not through anger but through intelligence and preparation. I walked through the kitchen, the metallic taste of morning coffee lingering on my tongue, thinking about the sensors I had set up weeks before, small cameras and automated alerts connected to my secure network, designed for property monitoring, now tools to capture every nuance of this unauthorized use. Every smell, sound, and shift in the room contributed to a mental map, an awareness that would allow me to act decisively yet legally, turning what could have been chaos into a controlled, orchestrated response. I remember the late nights cross-referencing case law, noting precedents where homeowners had asserted rights successfully against overreaching community associations, and the satisfaction of understanding how to translate technical expertise into leverage. The soft creak of the floorboards as I moved past the library, the faint scent of solder from the electronics bench, the subtle vibration from the heat running in the walls, all became part of a symphony of awareness, a record of everything that was mine, to be. Used in precision, not in haste. Standing there, I felt the calm certainty of someone who knows the rules and knows how to use them, the kind of internal clarity that allowed a person to watch an event unfold not with panic but with strategic foresight, seeing every motion, anticipating every choice, understanding that every element of the scene was both evidence and opportunity. I inhaled deeply, the smell of polished wood mingling with the faint hint of wax from my daughter's craft project, and I smiled inwardly, because this was my domain, every square foot accounted for, and the groundwork for what was coming next had been laid with patience, skill, and an unshakable understanding of right and responsibility. Margaret Harlow moved through the crowd with a practiced grace, clipboard clutched tightly, her high heels clicking against the polished oak as she gestured to various neighbors and acquaintances, explaining how every aspect of the gathering had been meticulously planned. Her voice carried through the room, light and confident, but beneath it, there was the faint undertone of authority, the way someone who believes they are untouchable communicates. I stayed near the threshold, observing each detail, noticing the way the folding chairs were placed just slightly off the lines I had drawn in my mind for safety and flow, the way the tablecloths draped over surfaces I had spent years customizing, and the subtle scent of artificial flowers that clashed with the natural aroma of my coffee brewing in the corner. I could feel the texture of the hardwood beneath my boots, cool and steady, grounding me as my mind catalogued every slight, every movement that overstepped boundaries. My daughter had stepped back into the room, quiet for once, watching intently from the staircase, eyes wide but trusting that I had the situation under control. I could hear the faint scrape of someone adjusting a chair, the subtle hum from the temporary sound system, and the occasional murmur of neighbors commenting on the unusual setup. Every noise, every shift in the room was data, and I processed it silently, noting where cameras should focus and how the angles of observation could reveal the truth later. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting stripes across the floor that intersected with shadows from furniture and decorations, a natural grid that would aid in documentation and serve as a visual record of intrusion. I breathed in slowly, the warm aroma of brewed coffee mixing with the faint metallic scent from my workshop equipment, and allowed myself to move among the crowd, nodding politely, never giving away the awareness of the plan already forming in my mind. Each step was measured, deliberate, as I observed the placement of banners and decorations, the trajectory of the cords running across the floor for lighting and audio, noting which elements could be traced back to unauthorized modifications. I could feel the weight of my keychain in my pocket, grounding me, a reminder that while the room appeared chaotic and festive, control and preparation had never left my hands. I checked the small cameras, their lenses glinting in the sunlight, capturing subtle details of movement and interaction, each frame a building block for the evidence I would assemble. Every sound of footsteps, every shuffle of paper, every whispered comment was a note in the symphony of observation, and I allowed myself a faint smile knowing that the careful patience invested over months in both preparation and understanding of property rights was about to pay off. The smell of the waxed floors, the soft clatter of chairs, the faint vibration of electrical equipment all melded into a sensory map that I carried in my head, each sense reinforcing the others, building a mental blueprint of what was happening. I moved closer to the center of the room, appearing casual, blending in, while internally marking areas that needed documentation and noting patterns of behavior that indicated overreach or assumption of authority. Every subtle movement by Margaret, every glance she cast, every instruction she gave was noted and stored, ready to be used in a careful, legal response that would be both precise and undeniable. I felt a quiet satisfaction in the control of observation, the awareness that each planted element, from banners to chairs to sound levels, would return as evidence in the unfolding story of rightful ownership and the assertion of boundaries, a story that was mine to tell and enforce. Margaret's voice rose slightly above the music as more people filtered in, the front door opening and closing in steady intervals, letting in bursts of warm afternoon air mixed with the faint scent of freshly cut grass from outside. Each arrival added another layer of noise, another set of footsteps pressing into floors that I knew down to the exact inch, floors that now carried unfamiliar weight without permission. I watched as a man dragged a speaker closer to the wall outlet I had installed myself, his extension cord snaking across the path I had deliberately kept clear for safety, and I noted the exact placement, the angle, the obstruction. Margaret turned toward me briefly, offering a smile that did not reach her eyes, the kind of smile that assumed compliance without ever asking for it. "We are expecting a great turnout," she said, as if this was a shared accomplishment, as if I had signed off on any of it. I gave a small nod, calm, controlled, letting her continue to build the narrative she believed was unshakable. The banner above my fireplace shifted slightly as someone adjusted it, the tape pulling at the paint I had carefully refinished just months earlier, and I felt a brief tightening in my chest that I immediately converted into focus. Every mark, every adjustment, every misplaced object was no longer just an annoyance, it was documentation waiting to be used. My daughter moved quietly along the staircase, her hand brushing the railing I had sanded smooth myself, her presence a silent reminder of why precision mattered, why boundaries were not optional. I stepped into the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator blending with the distant music, and glanced at the small monitor connected to my internal system. The camera feeds were clean, angles capturing entry points, interactions, timestamps forming a digital trail that could not be argued with. I could see Margaret near the center of the room, gesturing again, her posture confident, unaware that every second of her control was being recorded in exact detail. The smell of heated plastic from an overloaded power strip drifted faintly through the air, subtle but noticeable to someone who understood electrical systems, and I followed it with my eyes to a cluster of devices plugged into an outlet never meant to handle that kind of draw. Another note, another point of failure, another piece of evidence. I walk back into the living room, my steps steady, my expression neutral, blending into the background of what they believed was their event. Conversations overlapped, laughter bounced off the walls, but beneath it all I could hear the inconsistencies, the strain on systems not designed for this kind of use. A chair scraped against the floor in the wrong direction, leaving a faint mark across the finish, and I watched it happen without reacting, storing it away with everything else. Margaret's voice cut through again, announcing a schedule, a lineup, plans that extended further into the evening, plans made without the slightest acknowledgement of ownership. That was the moment I understood just how far she intended to go, how deeply she believed this space had become hers to command. I let the realization settle, steady and cold, not as anger but as confirmation. The air felt thicker now, warmer from the growing crowd, the scent of perfume and cologne layering over the natural smells of my home, masking but not replacing them. I adjusted my watch, a small habitual motion, and took one more slow look around the room, mapping every position, every connection, every violation. They were building something temporary on top of something permanent, assuming it would hold, assuming there would be no consequence. I had spent years learning how structures fail when pressure is applied at the right point, how systems collapse not from chaos but from precision. And standing there, surrounded by noise and borrowed confidence, I knew exactly where those points were. The room kept filling, the noise rising in layers that pressed against the walls like a system running past its safe capacity, and I could feel it in the subtle vibrations under my feet, in the way the floor carried sound differently when too many bodies occupied the same space. Someone laughed too loudly near the hallway, another guest shifted a table a few inches without realizing they had just blocked an access path I had deliberately designed for airflow and movement, and every small misstep added to the growing list in my head. I walked slowly toward the edge of the living room, brushing my fingers lightly along the wall where I knew the wiring ran clean and precise behind the surface, remembering the exact route of every cable I had installed myself. The faint warmth radiating from that wall told me what I already suspected: too much load, too many devices pulling from circuits that were never meant to support a full-scale event. The smell of heated insulation lingered just beneath the surface, not dangerous yet, but enough to confirm that the setup they had forced into my home was already pushing limits. Margaret continued moving through the crowd like she owned the air itself, greeting people, adjusting decorations, pointing out features of the house as if she had built them with her own hands. I watched her pause near my bookshelf, gesturing toward it as part of the ambience, and I noted the exact moment, the exact position, the exact misrepresentation. Every second she spoke was another layer of assumption recorded in real time. I stepped into my office, closing the door just enough to mute the noise, and the shift in sound felt immediate, like stepping out of a storm into a sealed chamber. The quiet hum of my equipment greeted me, steady and reliable, screens glowing with live feeds from every camera angle I had installed over the past year. Entry points, hallways, main living space, each frame timestamped, each movement tracked. I leaned closer to the monitor, watching as more guests crossed the threshold, each one entering a space they had not been invited into by its owner, each one unknowingly becoming part of the record. My fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up documents I had prepared long before this moment ever happened. Property records, municipal codes, HOA bylaws highlighted and cross-referenced, legal precedents bookmarked with notes written in the margins. I had spent nights going through these. Not because I expected this exact situation, but because I understood something Margaret did not. Ownership is not a suggestion, it is a structure backed by law, and when someone builds on top of it without permission, the entire thing becomes unstable. I could still hear the bass from the living room faintly through the walls, a dull pulse that reminded me the event was continuing, expanding, growing more confident by the minute. I opened another window on the screen, accessing the automated system I had configured weeks ago, a system designed for efficiency, for control, for situations where intervention needed to be precise and documented. Every outlet, every circuit, every connected device mapped and labeled, every switch capable of being managed without stepping into the room. I did not touch anything yet, not yet, because timing mattered more than action. The plan was not to interrupt, not to escalate emotionally, but to let everything reach a point where the response would be undeniable, where the line between assumption and violation would be clearly drawn for everyone present. I stood there for a moment, listening, feeling the faint vibration of music through the walls, the subtle hum of overloaded circuits, the distant echo of conversations layered over one another. My reflection stared back at me from the dark edge of the monitor, calm, focused, not a trace of panic or anger, just calculation. I reached into the drawer and pulled out a folder, thick with printed documents, each page a piece of the structure I had built behind the scenes. Notices prepared, references cited, documentation aligned with what was happening in real time. This was not improvisation, this was execution waiting for the right moment. I stepped back toward the door, opening it slowly, letting the sound flood back in, louder now, more confident, more intrusive. The air felt heavier, warmer, carrying the combined scent of perfume, food, and electricity working harder than it should. Margaret's voice rose again, announcing something about the next part of the gathering, and people shifted, chairs scraped, footsteps overlapped in a chaotic rhythm that contrasted sharply with the order I had built into every inch of this place. I moved into the room again, blending in, invisible in plain sight, while everything around me continued to build toward a peak they did not realize they were approaching. Every system has a threshold, every structure a breaking point, and as I stood there, listening, watching, feeling the subtle strain in the air itself, I knew they were getting very close to both. I stepped back into the hallway, the warmth from the crowd spilling over from the living room brushing against my skin like a tangible current. Every surface I passed, the smooth paint of the walls, the polished hardwood beneath my boots, every corner and edge, had been accounted for, and every misalignment caused by the gathering was quietly recorded in my mind. The faint scent of wax and polish lingered, mixing with the aroma of coffee and the subtle perfume drifting from Margaret as she moved from guest to guest, explaining the layout of the room and the planned activities, unaware that every detail she was orchestrating was being documented precisely. I moved toward the kitchen, tracing the path of extension cords that snaked across the floors, noting the overloading at particular outlets and the way some plugs were pulled at odd angles, minor stresses that most would ignore but that I knew could be referenced with exact precision. I opened my small cabinet and checked the files I had prepared, municipal codes, HOA bylaws, property ownership documents, and legal precedents, all annotated and organized for easy access. My fingers hovered over the papers, running across highlighted text, cross-references in margins, notes that would demonstrate clearly where authority ended and intrusion began. I returned to the living room subtly, making my presence known in small, unremarkable ways, yet all I seemed focused elsewhere, on the decorations, the food, the people, the artificial narrative that Margaret had created. I noticed where a chair had been shifted slightly, where a small table blocked a walkway I had intentionally left open, and where the banner above the fireplace tilted just enough to scrape the paint. Each of these small violations, seemingly insignificant, formed a lattice of evidence that mapped the overreach completely. I watched the subtle tremor in the floorboards when guests leaned on the wrong surfaces, the faint hum from overloaded circuits, the shifting acoustics of the music bouncing off crowded walls, all elements contributing to a meticulous record I was building without drawing attention. The room itself felt alive, every footstep, every whisper, every laugh captured and mentally catalogued, every object out of place a point to be referenced later. Margaret moved again, clipboard tapping lightly against her side, instructing a neighbor to adjust the setup, her words polite but commanding, and I noted her tone, timing, and the way she assumed cooperation without consent. I walked slowly along the perimeter, noting the placement of cameras I had installed discreetly, verifying angles, ensuring that every motion and every minor disruption would be captured clearly. The faint smell of heated electronics mixed with the aroma of baked goods, creating an unusual but precise record of environmental conditions, and I observed how light reflected off polished surfaces, casting shadows that highlighted small disruptions in the otherwise orderly space. Every small detail, from the way cords lay across the floor to the subtle movement of a decorative centerpiece, was part of a system I had quietly built over weeks, a system that would allow me to respond decisively, legally, and with undeniable clarity. I stood for a moment near the staircase, listening to the low murmur of voices and the distant music, feeling the subtle vibration through the floorboards, and considered the careful sequence of actions I had prepared. Every recorded movement, every observed violation, every environmental note was a part of the foundation for the response I was planning, a foundation that relied on timing, precision, and the unshakable understanding of ownership and rights. As I looked around, I felt a quiet confidence settle in, a calm awareness that the situation, no matter how chaotic it appeared to the guests, was entirely within my control. Every aspect of this gathering, every seemingly innocuous action, every misstep Margaret had orchestrated, was a piece of the puzzle that would soon reveal the full picture, a picture built on method, observation, and meticulous preparation. The moment had finally arrived, the crescendo of observation and preparation converging into clarity. I walked slowly toward the main living area, the subtle vibration under my boots syncing with the pulse of the distant music, each beat a reminder of the temporary order that Margaret believed she controlled. My hand brushed along the edge of the counter where someone had set a tray of refreshments, the slight displacement of the placemat perfectly noted, another detail recorded in my mental ledger. The guests continued to move and mingle, unaware that the sequence of events they were participating in was now entirely predictable, each step aligned with the plan I had quietly assembled over weeks. I opened the small cabinet beneath the countertop, lifting a folder filled with printed documentation, each page meticulously arranged to correspond with specific areas of the house, circuits, and observed violations. I glanced at the monitors again, seeing the live feeds capture angles of movement I could not physically watch at the moment, each one providing a digital record that mirrored my mental notes. Margaret continued issuing instructions, gesturing toward the audio setup, adjusting seating arrangements, completely oblivious to the fact that each modification she made only reinforced the case I was building. The warmth of the room increased as more people arrived, the mixture of perfume, coffee, and the faint metallic scent from my own equipment creating a complex olfactory map that would later be undeniable evidence of intrusion and overreach. I stepped carefully along the perimeter, ensuring I maintained both presence and invisibility, moving silently while the event carried on around me. Each misplaced chair, each shifted decoration, each cord stretched across the floor was accounted for, mapped in my mind and on the cameras, each one a piece of the framework I had been constructing, ready to execute the precise response I had envisioned. I could hear the faint hum from the overloaded outlets and the slight vibration of the wooden floor where the most activity occurred, subtle indicators that the infrastructure was being tested by the uninvited gathering. I made my way to the staircase, pausing briefly to watch my daughter from above, her eyes wide but calm, witnessing without interference, a reminder of why accuracy, patience, and adherence to preparation mattered more than any immediate reaction. Every ambient sound, every shadow cast by the sunlight through the blinds, every movement of a guest unaware of the precise legal and technical oversight around them, contributed to a comprehensive record, each element reinforcing the strategy one had in place. I adjusted my watch and took a slow breath, feeling the collected tension of observation transform into readiness, the accumulated data forming an invisible grid across the room, mapping every potential infraction and providing a foundation for action. With each measured step and every careful observation, I felt the quiet certainty of control, a calm understanding that the situation, though outwardly chaotic, was fully contained within the parameters I had established. As Margaret moved to announce another activity, I let my eyes track every motion, every adjustment, every minor infraction, knowing that the response, when executed, would be precise, undeniable, and entirely within my rights. The room was alive with sound and movement, yet beneath it, in the pattern of the crowd, the placement of objects, the slight hum of equipment, I could see the structure of the outcome taking shape, ready to unfold exactly as planned, with clarity, method, and the undeniable return of control to its rightful owner. The shift was subtle at first, a flicker of lights and a faint click from the smart outlets I had installed weeks prior, unnoticed by most but immediately registering with me. I watched as the atmosphere subtly changed, the hum of the crowd mingling with the pulsing of the music, each beat now syncing with the faint automated signals I had set to monitor and control the environment. Margaret continued moving through the room, gesturing and explaining, unaware that every motion, every adjustment, every directive was being captured both digitally and in the meticulous record I had maintained for months. I walked slowly to the center of the living area, letting my presence remain calm and neutral, blending seamlessly into the background while the orchestration of oversight quietly unfolded. The subtle vibration of overloaded outlets, the minor shifts in light intensity as temporary lamps responded to changes in power draw, and the small echoes from the hardwood floors created a pattern that was being monitored, timed, and recorded. Every misaligned chair, every bent decoration, every cord stretched across a walkway was part of the structure I had prepared, a lattice of evidence that had been quietly accumulating since the beginning of the event. My daughter stood nearby on the staircase, observing without interfering, her eyes wide and curious, yet confident in the silent plan I had developed, a plan that transformed the room itself into a controlled environment where the evidence of overreach and assumption of authority was undeniable. I checked the monitors again, noting the real-time feed of every entry point, every movement, and the subtle interactions that would later serve to demonstrate the precise nature of the intrusion. The faint scent of wax and coffee mixed with the delicate floral notes from the decorations, layering the air with sensory details that reinforced the presence of activity beyond permission. Margaret moved toward the refreshments, adjusting placements, directing someone to set chairs, all the while assuming control that she did not legally possess, her confidence growing with each step, each instruction, each casual assertion of ownership over spaces that were not hers to command. I moved silently among the edges of the room, observing, noting, mentally mapping every path, every object, every sound, transforming what appeared to be disorder into a detailed record that would become the foundation for legal and precise action. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting lines across floors, walls, and furniture, highlighting minor displacements that aligned perfectly with the observations I had catalogued, each shadow, each light shift reinforcing the documentation of the overreach. I breathed slowly, intentionally, keeping my movement measured and calm, while the event continued to unfold with all the energy of unawareness. Every small adjustment, every misplaced item, every step taken by the guests and by Margaret herself was contributing to the culmination of the plan I had quietly built over weeks. I could feel the energy of the room, the warmth from the crowd, the subtle thrum of the electrical systems under strain, and I allowed myself to watch and wait, knowing that each calculated element would soon converge into the precise moment where the response could be executed with clarity, legality, and undeniable authority. As I stood there, observing, cataloguing, and mentally reinforcing each violation and overstep, I felt the calm certainty of preparation settle fully, understanding that the time for action was near, and that the structure of observation, evidence, and strategy was complete, ready to transform the room, the event, and the narrative back into alignment with rightful ownership and control. The room finally settled, the last echoes of conversation fading into a hushed awareness as the natural weight of order reclaimed the space. I stood near the entrance, feeling the hardwood beneath my boots, polished to a shine that reflected both the afternoon sun and the meticulous attention I had always given to this home. Every detail of the event had been observed, every overstep catalogued, and now the presence of calm returned as if the house itself acknowledged the rightful balance restored. Margaret Harlow's movement slowed, the confident gestures replaced by subtle adjustments, her voice softer, more careful, as she noticed the evidence she had unknowingly contributed to. I walked through the living room slowly, I sweeping across the furnishings, the decorations, the temporary additions she had placed without consent, and every piece now stood as part of the documented record, highlighting the contrast between assumption and ownership. My daughter moved beside me quietly, her gaze absorbing the scene, understanding without words that the space she called home was under protection, that the structure of order, respect, and legality had been reaffirmed without confrontation, yet with absolute clarity. I glanced at the monitors one last time, confirming that every angle, every path, every interaction had been captured, the digital record complete and synchronized with the mental blueprint I had carried throughout the event. The faint scent of polished wood, brewed coffee, and lingering floral notes filled the air, now blending harmoniously rather than competing, a subtle affirmation that control had been regained. I walked past the kitchen, noting the precise placement of outlets, cords, and temporary equipment, all exactly as they should be, no longer stressed by misplacement or overuse, and I felt the quiet satisfaction of seeing the environment return to the parameters I had established. Margaret approached slowly, her clipboard lowered, a polite nod acknowledging the reality she could no longer deny, and I returned the nod with measured calm. The exchange weighted with the silent understanding that authority had been observed, recorded, and validated according to law and preparation. Every object that had been shifted, every minor disruption, every assumption she had made now served as tangible evidence of the boundaries she had crossed, evidence organized and undeniable, a story of precision, patience, and the application of knowledge to reclaim order. I walked to the center of the room, taking a deep breath, allowing the quiet energy to fill me, feeling the confidence of someone who had prepared for months, executed with focus, and ensured that the rightful control of space, of property, and of principle was restored. The light from the windows glinted softly across polished surfaces, highlighting the path of order and the return of responsibility to its proper place, and I allowed myself a small smile, knowing that every detail from the first intrusion to this moment had come together to create a seamless and undeniable restoration. The hum of life continued, subdued now, respectful of the restored balance, and I knew that the house, the evidence, and the rightful ownership were all firmly back in the hands of those who had earned it through foresight, preparation, and unwavering attention to detail. Standing there, observing the final moments of transition, I felt the clarity of justice achieved, not through loud confrontation, but through careful, calculated action, the kind that ensures that respect, order, and rightful authority endure.